$37,000 was supposed to be the end of a 6-month nightmare, but when I tried to deposit my bonus, it only bought me handcuffs and an accusation of fraud. The people who arrested me had no idea who they were truly dealing with. The check felt like a small, rectangular trophy in my hand. $37,000. Not just money, but a validation. A punctuation mark at the end of a brutal 6-month undercover operation that had taken me through the grimiest corners of the city's financial underworld. The kind of case that leaves you checking over your shoulder for weeks and seeing shadows in every doorway. But we'd gotten them. The whole crew. And this check, a seizure fund bonus, was the period at the end of the sentence. All I wanted was to deposit it, go home to my quiet apartment, take the longest, hottest shower of my life, and sleep for a solid day. A simple, mundane, human task. I walked into the Sterling Trust Bank branch feeling a lightness I hadn't felt in half a year. The air was cool and smelled faintly of industrial carpet cleaner and old money. Polished marble floors gleamed under recessed lighting, and the only sound was the quiet hum of computers and the soft tap-tap-tap of a teller's keyboard. I picked the shortest line, which led to a young man who couldn't have been more than 22. He had a faint mustache that looked more like a suggestion than a decision, and a name tag that read Kyle. When it was my turn, I smiled. "Hi, I'd just like to deposit this into my checking account, please." I slid the check and my debit card under the glass. Kyle picked up the check, and the change in his demeanor was instantaneous. It was subtle, but after 6 months of reading tells on hardened criminals, a nervous bank teller was an open book. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly. His fingers, which had been nimble on the keyboard, suddenly seemed clumsy as he held the paper. He looked from the check to my face, then back to the check. A tiny frown line appeared between his eyebrows. $37,000, he mumbled, more to himself than to me. He looked up at me again, and this time his smile was gone, replaced by a tight, professional mask that wasn't fooling anyone. "One moment, ma'am." He pressed a button on his console and whispered into a small microphone. I kept my smile in place, but a familiar coil of tension began to tighten in my stomach. I knew this playbook. I'd seen it before, just never from this side of the glass. I was dressed in what I called my off-duty uniform, a simple pair of dark wash jeans, a clean but unremarkable gray sweater, and comfortable flats. My hair was pulled back in a neat bun. I looked like any other woman on her lunch break. But to Kyle, I was suddenly an anomaly, a problem to be solved. A woman in a sharp gray pantsuit emerged from a back office. Her blonde hair was shellacked into a perfect bob, and her heels clicked with an aggressive authority on the marble floor. Her name tag read, Ms. Albright, branch manager. She didn't look at me. She went straight to Kyle, who handed her my check like it was a piece of contaminated evidence. Ms. Albright examined the check, holding it up to the light. She turned it over, then back again. Finally, she deigned to look at me. Her eyes, a pale, cold blue, swept over me from head to toe, and I could feel myself being catalogued and dismissed in a single glance. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice dripping with forced politeness. "There seems to be a question about this check." "Is there a problem?" I asked, keeping my voice even and calm. "Rule 1 of any confrontation. Control your own emotional state. It's a very substantial amount," she said, her gaze flicking back to the check, and then to my face, as if she couldn't reconcile the two. "Our policy requires us to perform additional verification on items like this." "Oof, I understand," I said. "The funds are good. It's from a federal holding account. You can call the issuing institution. The number is right there." She gave a thin, dismissive smile. "We have our own procedures, ma'am." She turned to Kyle. "Put a hold on her account, and call the number on our verification list, not the one printed on the check." My internal alarm bells, which had been ringing softly, now began to clang. Calling a different number? That wasn't procedure. That was a prelude. They weren't trying to verify the check. They were trying to build a case against me. "Ma'am," I said, my voice a little firmer now. "That's my bonus from a successfully completed project with my employer. I can assure you it's legitimate. If you just call the number on the check, They'll verify the funds immediately. Ms. Albright's smile vanished completely. Your employer? She asked, the skepticism practically oozing from her. We will follow our protocol. In the meantime, we'll need you to wait. She turned and began to walk back toward her office. But instead of going inside, she stopped, pulled out her phone, and began speaking in a low, urgent tone. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. I saw her glance over her shoulder at me. I saw the grim set of her jaw. She wasn't calling a verification service. She was calling the police. I stood at the counter, a cold fury building beneath my trained composure. The other customers in the bank were starting to notice. I saw them whispering, stealing glances at me. The woman in line behind me took a deliberate step back as if I were contagious. In the space of 10 minutes, I had gone from a valued customer to a public spectacle, a suspected criminal. All because the sight of a black woman with a large check had broken the fragile logic of their world. 2 uniformed police officers walked through the glass doors about 5 minutes later. They moved with the easy, deliberate swagger of men who were used to being in charge. The older one, stocky and gray-haired with a name tag that read Miller, made a beeline for Ms. Albright. The younger one, Davis, lingered near the door, his eyes scanning the bank before landing on me. Ms. Albright pointed a perfectly manicured finger in my direction. That's her, officer. She's trying to cash a fraudulent check. It wasn't a question. It was a declaration of fact, an accusation delivered with the full weight of her perceived authority. Officer Miller walked toward me, his hand resting casually on the butt of his sidearm. He didn't ask for my side of the story. He didn't ask for my name. He looked at me with an expression of weary annoyance, like I was just another piece of paperwork he had to deal with before his shift ended. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a low growl, "I'm going to need you to come with us. We need to ask you a few questions down at the station." "Officer, there has been a misunderstanding," I said, my voice as level as a sheet of ice. "The bank manager has made a mistake. If you would simply allow them to properly verify the check." "We're past that," he cut me off. "Ms. Albright here says the check is a fake. We're going to get to the bottom of it. Now, are you going to come peacefully, or do we have to do this the hard way?" His hand moved from his gun to the handcuffs on his belt. The threat was clear. My mind was racing, weighing the options. I could end this right now. One phone call. I could show them the credentials tucked securely in my wallet and watch the blood drain from their faces. But doing so would compromise everything. The identities of my team, other ongoing operations connected to the case I just closed, it would all be blown wide open for a simple bank dispute. My cover was my life and the lives of others. I couldn't burn it. Not for this. I had to play the role they had assigned me. I slowly raised my hands. "There's no need for that, officer. I'll cooperate." But Miller wasn't interested in cooperation. He was interested in performance. He grabbed my left wrist with a surprising amount of force, twisting it behind my back. "Turn around. Hands behind your back." The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot wave that washed over me as the entire bank stared. I could feel their judgment, their fear, their morbid curiosity. I complied, my face a mask of stone. I heard the metallic rattle of the handcuffs, and then the cold, sharp click as the first cuff locked around my wrist. He grabbed my other hand, pulling it back to meet the first. They slapped the cuffs on me, tight and cold against my skin. The 2 officers, the smug bank manager, the nervous little teller, they all thought they had caught a common criminal. They had no idea they had just arrested a federal agent, and they were about to learn in the most permanent way possible that the FBI has a very, very long memory. The walk out of the bank was the longest of my life. Every pair of eyes felt like a physical weight, pressing down on me. I kept my head high, my expression neutral, focusing on the rhythmic click of Miss Albright's heels on the marble behind us. She was escorting us out, a triumphant little smirk playing on her lips, as if she'd personally vanquished a dragon. Officer Miller had a firm grip on my arm, his knuckles digging into my bicep, parading me through the lobby like a trophy. I made eye contact with Kyle, the young teller. He wouldn't meet my gaze, his face pale as he stared intently at his computer screen, pretending to be busy. He had set this fire, and now he was trying to disappear into the smoke. Outside, the city air hit me, thick with exhaust fumes and the midday heat. People on the sidewalk stopped and stared. A man talking on his phone lowered it to gawk. A mother pulled her young child closer to her side. To all of them, the scene was simple. A black woman in handcuffs, flanked by two white cops. The story wrote itself in their minds. Guilty. They pushed me into the back of the patrol car. The vinyl seat was cracked and sticky from the sun. The cage between the front and back seats made me feel like an animal. As Officer Davis got behind the wheel, Miller settled into the passenger seat, finally releasing my arm. He turned around, leaning over the seat to look at me. "You really thought you could waltz in there and cash a $37,000 hot check?" he asked, a look of genuine disbelief on his face. "In a sweater and jeans? Come on, you gotta at least try to look the part." "The check is legitimate," I said, my voice flat. My wrists were already beginning to ache from the tight cuffs. Davis chuckled from the driver's seat as he pulled away from the curb. "That's what they all say. So where'd you get it? Steal a mailbox? Cook it up on your laptop? We found a whole crew last month printing these things in their basement. Looked real too, until you looked close. They spoke about me as if I wasn't there, a specimen to be analyzed. I stayed silent, turning my head to look out the window. My training kicked in, pushing the anger and humiliation down into a cold, hard knot in my stomach. I started documenting. The officers' names were Miller and Davis. The car was a standard-issue Ford Interceptor, unit number 347. We were heading east on Elm Street, then took a left on 4th. I memorized the route, the turns, the landmarks. Every detail was a weapon I might need later. The precinct was exactly what you'd expect. It smelled of stale coffee, cheap disinfectant, and quiet desperation. They led me through a series of drab, gray hallways to a processing room. A weary-looking officer behind a high counter took my purse, cataloging my belongings with a bored monotone. Wallet, keys, phone, a tube of lip balm. He paused when he got to my wallet. He opened it, his thick fingers fumbling through the cards. "Got a lot of credit cards in here," he noted, glancing up at me. "All in the name of Jasmine Carter." He said my cover name like it was the most ridiculous thing he'd ever heard. "That's my name," I said. He grunted, tossing the wallet into a large Ziploc bag with the rest of my things. "We'll see." Then came the fingerprints. The cold, sticky ink rolled onto each finger, then pressed firmly onto a card. My identity, reduced to a series of whirls and loops, filed away as a criminal. Then the mugshot. Face the front, turn to the right, turn to the left. The flash was blinding. In that split second, I wondered how many innocent people had stood on this very spot. Their guilt already decided, their image captured and filed away by a system that didn't care to look past the surface. They put me in a small, windowless interrogation room. A metal table was bolted to the floor, along with 2 chairs. The walls were a sickly shade of beige, covered in scuff marks. The air was cold. I sat, my hands still cuffed behind my back, and I waited. I ran through protocols in my head. They had my phone, but my real credentials weren't in my wallet. They were in a secure compartment in my car, parked 3 blocks away. My cover was still intact. As long as they didn't run my prints through the National FBI database, a step they wouldn't take for a simple state-level fraud charge. I was just Jasmine Carter, a woman in a world of trouble. After what felt like an hour, the door opened. Officer Miller walked in, followed by a man in a rumpled suit who had to be a detective. The detective was older than Miller, with tired eyes and a coffee stain on his tie. He dropped a thin file folder onto the table. It slapped against the metal with a sharp, definitive sound. "I'm Detective Sullivan," he said, not offering to shake my hand. He sat down opposite me. Miller remained standing by the door, arms crossed, a silent enforcer. "So, Jasmine," Sullivan began, opening the folder. "You're having a very bad day. We've been in touch with Sterling Trust's fraud department. They took one look at a picture of that check and flagged it immediately. It's a high-quality forgery, I'll give you that. But the account number is inactive. The routing number doesn't match the issuing institution's location. It's a ghost." I stared at him. It was all lies. Utter, complete fabrication. The account was a Treasury Department dispersal account. It was as real as the chair I was sitting on. They hadn't verified anything. They had seen what they wanted to see, and now they were creating a narrative to fit their prejudice. "Detective," I said calmly, "your information is wrong. The bank manager, Miss Albright, refused to call the verification number printed on the check. She called her own internal number, likely speaking to someone who has no access to federal accounts. If you make the proper call, this will all be cleared up." Sullivan leaned back, a smirk playing on his lips. "Oh, I see. So it's a grand conspiracy. The bank manager, the fraud department, me, Officer Miller here. We're all in on it, just to frame you. Is that it?" He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Look, here's how this goes. You can stick to your story, and you'll be charged with felony bank fraud, forgery, and a few other things I can drum up. You'll be in a cell by dinner, and you won't see the sun for 5 to 10 years. Or you can help yourself. Tell us who you're working with. Who printed the check? We know you're not the mastermind. Give us the big fish, and maybe we can make a deal for you." The knot of cold fury in my stomach tightened. They weren't just wrong. They were arrogant. They were so sure of their own assumptions they couldn't conceive of any other reality. I had given them every opportunity to de-escalate, to do their jobs properly. They had refused. They had chosen this path. And now, so would I. I looked Detective Sullivan dead in the eye. "I'm done talking to you," he scoffed. "You don't get to decide that." "Actually, I do," I said, my voice dropping to a register that was all business. "I'm invoking my right to a phone call, and I'd advise you to listen very carefully to the call I need to make." Miller laughed from the doorway. "Sure thing. You can call your mommy or a lawyer. Makes no difference to us." I ignored him, my gaze locked on Sullivan. "I don't need a local lawyer. What I need is for you to get me a secure, recorded line to Washington, D.C. I need to speak with Assistant Director Reynolds at the FBI's Washington Field office. Tell the operator it's a Code Sierra matter regarding Operation Nightfall. He'll be expecting my call." For a moment, the only sound in the interrogation room was the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. The silence stretched, thick and heavy with disbelief. Then it broke. Officer Miller let out a short, sharp bark of a laugh. It wasn't a sound of amusement, it was a sound of contempt. "Code Sierra? Operation Nightfall?" he sneered, taking a step forward from the door. "Are you kidding me? You've been watching too much TV, lady. Detective, she's wasting our time. Let's just book her and be done with it." Detective Sullivan didn't laugh. He just watched me, his tired eyes narrowing slightly, searching my face for a tell. He was looking for the flicker of fear, the crack in the facade that would reveal the bluff. He wouldn't find it. The mask I wore was one I had perfected over years of deep cover work. It was more real than the face underneath. "The FBI, huh?" Sullivan said, his voice laced with a patronizing calm. "That's a big claim. A very, very big claim. And making false statements about being a federal officer? That's a whole new set of felonies we can tack on. Are you sure you want to go down this road?" "I am not making a false statement," I replied, my voice as cold and hard as the metal table. "I am giving you a chance to mitigate the damage you have already done. Every minute you delay that phone call, the worse this gets for you, for Officer Miller, for your precinct, and for that branch manager, Ms. Albright. Assistant Director Reynolds is overseeing the debrief on a multi-agency operation. My failure to check in will trigger a protocol that will eventually lead a team of very serious, very unamused federal agents right to this room. And the first question they will ask is why one of their own is sitting in a police interrogation room in handcuffs." I let the words hang in the air. I saw a flicker of something in Sullivan's eyes. It wasn't belief, not yet. It was a sliver of professional doubt. A tiny, nagging, what if? The names, the code words, the sheer audacity of my claim. It was just specific enough to be unsettling. A common criminal would invent a vague story. I had given him a chain of command. "Look," he said, leaning forward and lowering his voice, trying to project a sense of reasonable authority. "Jasmine, I get it. You're in a jam. You tried something, it didn't work, and now you're scared. You're throwing a Hail Mary. But this isn't the way. The only person you're hurting with this fantasy is yourself. My name is Special Agent Carter, I stated, correcting him with icy precision. And the only fantasy here is the one you've constructed, where a woman who looks like me couldn't possibly be in possession of a legitimate $37,000 check. Now are you going to make the call? Or do we all have to wait for my director to send a tactical team to find out why I've missed my check-in? The word tactical was a calculated risk. It was meant to paint a picture in his mind, one of black-clad agents and a world of trouble far above his pay grade. Sullivan stared at me for a long, hard 10 seconds. The condescension in his eyes was at war with that tiny seed of doubt. Finally, he pushed his chair back, the legs scraping loudly against the concrete floor. "All right," he sighed, the picture of a man burdened by procedure. "I'll make a call. You wait here." He looked at Miller. "Stay with her." He left, shutting the door firmly behind him. I knew he wasn't calling Assistant Director Reynolds. He was going to call a buddy, maybe a local FBI liaison, to run the name Jasmine Carter and see if anything popped. He was trying to disprove me, not verify me. But he had just made a critical error. My cover name was clean, but any inquiry from law enforcement about an operation codenamed Nightfall, no matter how unofficial, would trigger an immediate internal alert at the Bureau. He thought he was pulling a string. He'd actually just tripped a wire. Now I was alone with Miller. He walked over to the table and leaned on it with his knuckles, bringing his face uncomfortably close to mine. I could smell the stale coffee on his breath. "So, Special Agent," he said, drawing the words out mockingly. "That was a pretty good story. You almost had the old man going for a second there, but not me. I've been doing this for 20 years. I can smell a liar a mile away." I didn't respond. I just stared at him. My gaze focused on a point somewhere just past his head. This infuriated him more than any verbal sparring could have. "Nothing to say now? Cat got your tongue?" He paced back and forth in the small room. "You know, we could have made this easy for you, but you had to go and get cute. Now, when Sullivan gets back and tells us you're full of it, things are going to get a lot more unpleasant. We can hold you for 72 hours without a judge seeing you. And trust me, these cells, they're not comfortable." I remained silent, focusing on my breathing. In, out, slow, steady. I was no longer a participant in this scene. I was an observer, waiting for the inevitable conclusion. My anger had cooled and hardened into something else, a professional certainty. I knew what was coming. They didn't. The wait was agonizing. 10 minutes became 20. 20 became 30. Through the thin door, I could hear the muffled sounds of the precinct, phones ringing, distant, unintelligible chatter. Miller was getting visibly agitated, checking his watch, muttering under his breath. He was expecting Sullivan to come back any second with a triumphant, "I told you so." Finally, the door opened. But it wasn't the triumphant return Miller was expecting. Detective Sullivan stood in the doorway, his face ashen. The ruddy, confident complexion was gone, replaced by a sickly gray pallor. He was holding his phone in his hand, his knuckles white. He didn't look at Miller. His eyes, wide with a dawning horror, were locked on me. He looked at me as if he were seeing me for the first time, not as a suspect, but as the harbinger of his own professional doom. He took a shaky step into the room. He looked from my face to the steel cuffs binding my wrists behind my back, and a visible shudder went through him. "Miller," he said, his voice barely a whisper. It was strained, cracking under a pressure I knew all too well. "What is it, Sully?" Miller asked, a grin starting to form on his face, assuming his partner had confirmed their suspicions. "She full of it?" Sullivan swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. He finally tore his gaze away from me and looked at his partner. The look in his eyes wasn't one of confirmation. It was pure, unadulterated panic. "Get the cuffs off her," Sullivan choked out. "Now." Miller's grin evaporated, replaced by a look of slack-jawed confusion. "What? Sully, what are you talking about? We've got her dead to rights." I said," Sullivan repeated, his voice now a low, urgent command that brooked no argument. "Get the cuffs off her. Now." He moved further into the room, holding up his phone for Miller to see. I couldn't see the screen, but I could guess what was on it. Probably a very direct, very profane text message from a superior officer who had just gotten off the phone with someone very high up the FBI food chain. A jolt of pure adrenaline, sharp and clean, cut through my exhaustion. The game had just changed. Miller stared at the phone, then back at me. The smug certainty drained from his face like water from a sieve, leaving behind a bewildered fear. He fumbled at his belt for the handcuff key, his thick fingers suddenly clumsy and uncooperative. He looked like a man who had just realized the grenade he'd been juggling for the last hour had a pin made of ice. He came around the table, his movements stiff and awkward. He avoided my eyes as he inserted the key into the first lock. The cuff sprang open with a soft click. The relief as blood rushed back into my wrist was immediate and intense. He unlocked the other, and I brought my arms around to the front, slowly rubbing the raw, red welts the steel had left on my skin. I didn't say a word. The silence was my weapon now, and it was devastatingly effective. I stood up, stretching my arms and rolling my shoulders. The simple act of free movement felt like an incredible luxury. Miller took a half step back, creating a cautious distance between us. Sullivan was still standing by the door, looking like he was about to be physically ill. There's been a mistake, Sullivan stammered, directing his words to the floor. A misunderstanding. We received some bad information from the bank. You didn't receive bad information, detective, I said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of the entire room. You received a prejudice and called it information. You saw what you expected to see, and you didn't bother to do your actual job. He flinched as if I'd slapped him. Special Agent Carter, we apologize. Apology not accepted, I said flatly. I looked from his pale face to Miller's. You didn't just make a mistake. You illegally detained me. You publicly humiliated me. You attempted to coerce a false confession for a crime I didn't commit. You denied me my rights. And you did it all with a smug sense of righteousness because you didn't think I mattered. I took a step toward them. They both instinctively recoiled. I'm going to need my property back. Now, and then I'm going to need this room. Alone. You two will wait outside. Do not go anywhere. Do not talk to anyone. A team from the Washington field office is en route to this precinct. Your police chief has already been notified. He is also on his way here. You will speak when they tell you to speak. Is that clear? Sullivan just nodded, his throat working but no sound coming out. Miller, for his part, looked completely shell-shocked, his brain unable to process the rapid reversal of fortunes. He just stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. They escorted me back to the processing desk. The weary officer who had booked me in looked up, confused, as Sullivan ordered him to return my belongings immediately. He handed the Ziploc bag over. I took out my wallet and phone. I checked the phone. They hadn't tried to access it, likely assuming it was beyond their capabilities. I looked up and saw that a small crowd of other officers and detectives had gathered in the hallway, drawn by the palpable tension. They were whispering, staring. The news was spreading. I was led back to the interrogation room. Before I went in, I turned to Sullivan. Detective, I want a pot of black coffee and a printout of every file, every report, every note you and Officer Miller have made regarding my arrest. Yes, ma'am, he mumbled, and scurried off like a frightened mouse. I went back into the room and shut the door, leaving them standing outside like scolded schoolboys. I sat down in the chair Sullivan had occupied, on the other side of the table, the side with the power. I took a deep breath, the first truly steady one I'd taken since I walked into the bank. The anger was still there, a cold, hard lump of it, but it was now a controlled burn, fueling my focus. About 10 minutes later, there was a timid knock on the door. I opened it to find a young uniformed officer holding a mug of coffee and a thin stack of papers. He handed them to me without a word, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe, and then practically ran down the hall. I sat and sipped the coffee. It was terrible, but it was hot and caffeinated. I read through their reports. It was all there, in black and white. The initial call from Albright, citing a suspicious individual. Miller and Davis's report, which described me as uncooperative and argumentative. Sullivan's preliminary notes for the DA, which already recommended charging me with the maximum possible offenses. It was a textbook case of confirmation bias, a self-fulfilling prophecy of manufactured guilt. Every page I read stoked the fire inside me. I had been in that room for nearly an hour when the door opened again. This time, it wasn't a nervous detective. Standing there was a man in an impeccably tailored suit, his silver hair neatly combed, his face a mask of grim authority. Behind him stood two other men, both dressed in similar dark suits, their expressions unreadable. "David," I said, a wave of relief washing over me. "Are you all right, Carter?" Assistant Director David Reynolds asked, his sharp eyes scanning me for any sign of injury. "I'm fine, sir," I replied, standing up. "Just angry." "You have every right to be," he said, his voice a low baritone that commanded respect. He stepped fully into the room, his team flanking the doorway. "We'll deal with this. I've already spoken to the director of the FBI and the U.S. attorney for this district. This will not be swept under the rug." He looked down at the reports on the table. "They gave you these?" "At my request," I said. He nodded grimly. "Good. My team will take those as evidence." He turned to one of the agents at the door. "Agent Marks, secure these documents, then go find Detective Sullivan and Officer Miller. Take their badges and service weapons. They are on administrative leave, effective immediately. Inform their chief that they are the subjects of a federal civil rights investigation." Agent Marks nodded crisply. "Yes, sir." He moved into the room, gathered the papers with practiced efficiency, and then exited, his partner falling into step behind him. The entire exchange took less than 10 seconds, a display of quiet, lethal competence that made the bumbling arrogance of Miller and Sullivan seem even more pathetic. The sounds from the hallway faded as they moved off to execute their orders, leaving me alone with my boss. Reynolds turned his full attention back to me. His expression softened from the iron mask of command to one of genuine concern. "Sit down, Carter. Talk to me. From the beginning." So I did. I walked him through every detail, from the moment I stepped up to Kyle's counter, to the moment Sullivan got the phone call that turned his world upside down. I was clinical and precise, recounting the events as I would for an official report. But as I spoke, the cold knot of fury in my stomach began to unravel, and underneath it was something else, a deep, profound exhaustion. Not just from the 6-month undercover op, but from the constant low-grade battle I had to fight every single day, even when I wasn't on the job. The battle of being seen, of being believed, of simply being allowed to exist without suspicion. "The bank manager, Albright," Reynolds said, his voice tight with controlled anger when I finished. "She initiated the call. She made the accusation. Without her, none of this would have happened. She pointed at me and told them I was a criminal," I confirmed. "She seemed to enjoy it." He was silent for a moment, his jaw working. David Reynolds was a man who had seen the absolute worst of humanity in his 30 years with the Bureau. He was not easily shocked or angered, but I could see the storm gathering in his eyes now. This wasn't just about a procedural failure or a case of mistaken identity. This was an insult to the Bureau, to one of his own agents. It was personal. "The U.S. Attorney's Office is already drafting subpoenas for the bank's records and surveillance footage," he said. "Every call, every email, every internal memo related to this incident will be scrutinized. Ms. Albright is about to learn the difference between bank policy and federal law." Just then, Agent Marks reappeared at the door. "Sir, the chief of police is here." "Send him in," Reynolds said. A moment later, a man in a crisp, decorated police chief's uniform entered the room. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and looked like he had just run a marathon in his dress blues. His face was flushed and a sheen of sweat glistened on his forehead. He looked from Reynolds to me, his expression a frantic cocktail of panic and conciliation. "Assistant Director Reynolds," he began, his voice strained. "I am Chief Williams. I came as soon as I heard. I want to offer my sincerest, most profound apologies to you and to Special Agent Carter. What happened here today is inexcusable. It is a failure of training, a failure of oversight, and a failure of character on the part of those two officers. I assure you, they will be disciplined to the fullest extent." Reynolds didn't offer him a seat. "Discipline is a given, Chief. What I'm concerned about is the culture in your department that allowed this to happen in the first place. My agent gave your detective a direct, verifiable way to end the situation, a secure line to my office. He ignored it. Why? Because he couldn't entertain the possibility that he was wrong. That's not a training issue. That's a rot. The chief paled. Sir, I can assure you, we will be conducting a full internal review. You will, Reynolds agreed, his voice dangerously soft, and you will be sharing the results of that review with the Department of Justice, which will be conducting its own investigation into your department's patterns and practices. Agent Carter's experience today suggests there may be a systemic problem here. We intend to find out. Chief Williams looked like he'd been punched in the gut. A DOJ pattern and practice investigation was the administrative equivalent of a nuclear bomb. It meant years of federal oversight, mandated reforms, and a black mark on his department and his own career that would never wash away. I watched the exchange, feeling a strange sense of detachment. This was bigger than me now. My humiliation had become a catalyst, a lever that was being used to pry open a locked door and let the light in. After the chief had been dismissed, practically staggering out of the room under the weight of his new reality, Reynolds turned to me. I've arranged for a car to take you home, Carter. I want you to go home, get some rest, take the next few days off. We'll handle everything from here. With all due respect, sir, I said, my voice firm. I don't want to go home. I want to go back to the bank. He raised an eyebrow. Why? Because they started this, I said, the cold resolve returning. They need to be there for the ending. I want Miss Albright to see you. I want her to see the agents from your office. I want Kyle the teller to see them. I don't want them to hear about it on the news. I want them to understand the magnitude of what they did, right to their faces. I won't be able to rest until they do. Reynolds studied my face for a long moment. He saw the steel in my eyes, the unyielding set of my jaw. He saw that this wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. It was about closing the circle. A slow, thin smile touched his lips. It was a chilling sight. All right, Carter, he said. You've earned it. Let's go to the bank. The ride to Sterling Trust was quiet. We traveled in a black government-issue SUV, with Reynolds and me in the back, and 2 other agents in the front. We were followed by a second SUV carrying more of our team. There were no lights, no sirens. We were a silent, dark parade moving through the city. We pulled up to the curb, right in front of the bank's main entrance. The afternoon sun was glinting off the large glass doors. Through them I could see that the bank was still open for business, the quiet hum of commerce continuing as if nothing had happened. As if my life hadn't been turned upside down within its marble walls just a few hours ago. Reynolds turned to me. Ready? I nodded. Ready. Let's go. We got out of the car. All of us. 6 federal agents in dark suits, moving with a synchronized, purposeful stride. I walked in the center with Assistant Director Reynolds by my side. We pushed through the glass doors and the cool, conditioned air hit my face once again. The bank fell silent. The handful of remaining customers and the tellers all stopped what they were doing and stared. Their eyes widened as our grim little procession walked onto the pristine marble floor. Kyle, the young teller, was at his station. He looked up, saw me, and all the color drained from his face. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. Then I saw her. Ms. Albright was standing near the vault talking to a security guard. She heard the sudden silence and turned, an annoyed expression on her face. Her eyes swept over the agents, then they landed on me. Her jaw dropped. The professional smirk, the look of smug superiority, it all melted away, replaced by an expression of pure, uncomprehending shock. She saw me, not in handcuffs, but flanked by the full, imposing power of the United States government. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Reynolds didn't even look at her. His eyes were scanning the room, assessing. Agent Marks, he said, his voice echoing in the sudden cathedral-like silence of the bank. Secure the exits. Nobody leaves. This is now a federal crime scene. The words federal crime scene acted like a switch, plunging the bank into a state of suspended animation. Customers froze mid-transaction. Tellers' hands hovered over their keyboards. The quiet hum of banking ceased, replaced by a silence so profound it felt like a pressure against the ears. Agent Marks and another agent moved with silent efficiency to the glass front doors, their presence alone a more formidable barrier than any lock. 2 other agents fanned out, their calm, watchful eyes sweeping over the stunned faces of the employees and patrons. Miss Albright finally found her voice, though it was a thin, reedy version of its former self. What is the meaning of this? You can't just come in here and—" Assistant Director Reynolds turned his head slowly and pinned her with a gaze that could have frozen fire. "I can, and I have. I am Assistant Director Reynolds of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and right now you are obstructing a federal investigation. I suggest you stop talking and start listening." Her mouth snapped shut with an audible click. The security guard beside her, a man twice her size, seemed to shrink into his ill-fitting uniform, his eyes wide with alarm. He instinctively took a step away from her, as if proximity might be a form of contamination. I walked forward, stopping directly in front of the counter where this whole nightmare began. I looked at Kyle. The poor kid looked like he was about to faint. His face was blotchy, his hands were shaking, and he was staring at me with the terrified reverence of a peasant who had just insulted a queen, only to see her return with an army. "Kyle," I said, my voice calm and even. "A few hours ago, you took a check from me. You made a decision not to trust it. You made a decision not to trust me. You escalated it to your manager. I want you to tell Assistant Director Reynolds, right now, exactly what you saw and what you did." He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He glanced nervously at Miss Albright, who shot him a look that was a desperate mix of warning and pleading. But the fear of the woman who could fire him was nothing compared to the fear of the man who could send him to federal prison. I, he stammered, his eyes darting back to me. "The check was for a large amount. Our policy is to get a manager for anything over 10,000. "And did you attempt to verify the check, Kyle?" Reynolds asked, his voice deceptively gentle. "Did you call the number printed on the check itself?" "No, sir," he whispered. "Miss Albright. She told me not to. She said to use our internal system, and she took over." "She took over," Reynolds repeated, letting the words hang in the air. He then turned his full attention back to the branch manager. "Miss Albright, you took a legitimate check, issued from a U.S. Treasury account, and declared it fraudulent without performing the most basic due diligence. You then called the local police and made a false report, accusing a federal agent of a felony. That report led to her unlawful arrest and detainment. You have exposed this financial institution to a level of civil and criminal liability that will likely be measured in the tens of millions of dollars, and you have personally committed a series of federal offenses, including making false statements and conspiring to deprive an individual of their civil rights under color of authority." With each sentence, Albright seemed to diminish, the sharp lines of her pantsuit and the severe cut of her hair no longer projecting power, but a brittle fragility. The color had completely drained from her face, leaving her lipstick a garish slash of red against a canvas of white. It was a mistake," she finally managed to say, her voice trembling. "A misunderstanding. Bank policy." "Do not say the words bank policy to me again," Reynolds cut her off, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "There is no bank policy in this country that supersedes the United States Constitution. You didn't see a customer with a large check. You saw a black woman, and your prejudice did the rest. You didn't see a transaction. You saw a crime. And you weaponized a 911 call to validate your own bigotry." He took a step closer to her. "The men you called, Detective Sullivan and Officer Miller, have been suspended. They have surrendered their badges and weapons. They are now the subjects of a federal investigation that will end their careers, and may very well end their freedom. And you, Miss Albright, are the one who handed them the shovel and told them where to dig." I watched, a silent observer to the systematic dismantling of her world. It wasn't triumphant. It was just necessary. It was the closing of a circle, the balancing of a scale that had been violently tilted. Reynolds turned to one of his agents. "Take her statement, take everyone's statement, and get the name of the regional vice president for this bank. I want him on the phone in the next 10 minutes. He then looked back at me. "Carter, there's one more thing we need to do." He nodded toward the teller window. "Let's finish your transaction." It was a symbolic gesture, but a powerful one. I walked back to the counter, Kyle staring at me as if I were about to pronounce his doom. I reached into my purse and pulled out my debit card. "I still need to deposit that check," I said. An agent brought the check over from the evidence bag. It looked so small and innocuous now, a simple piece of paper that had caused so much chaos. Kyle took it from the agent's gloved hand. His own hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold it. He fumbled with his keyboard, his eyes glued to the screen, sweat beading on his upper lip. I need your ID, Mum." "Agent," he stammered, the words catching in his throat. I slid my FBI credentials across the counter. Not my Jasmine Carter driver's license, but my actual, official identification. The gold badge and the crisp photo ID that gave me the authority to carry a weapon and enforce the laws of the United States. Kyle stared at it, his eyes wide with a terror that was almost pitiful. He processed the deposit, his fingers tapping the keys with frantic, jerky movements. The machine whirred and spat out a receipt. He slid it toward me, his hand trembling. "Here you go, Agent Carter. It's all set." I took the receipt and looked at it. $37,000, deposited into my account. The task I had set out to do this morning was finally complete. I looked up from the receipt, my eyes meeting Kyle's. I could see the desperate plea in them, the silent begging for forgiveness, for me to say something, anything, that would lift this crushing weight from him. But before I could speak, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text message from a blocked number, which was the standard protocol for a priority alert from HQ. I pulled it out, my brow furrowing. Reynolds saw the look on my face. "What is it, Carter?" I read the short, cryptic message, and the blood ran cold in my veins. The calm I had felt, the sense of justice being served, it all vanished in an instant, replaced by a surge of pure, ice-cold dread. It had nothing to do with the bank, or the cops, or the money. It was about the case I had just closed. Operation Nightfall. The message contained only 5 words. "Nightfall is not over. Asset compromised." The hum of the bank's ventilation system, which had been a background drone, suddenly roared in my ears. The faces around me, Kyle's terrified visage, Albright's crumbling composure, Reynolds's sharp concern, all seemed to recede, blurring at the edges as if I were looking through a tunnel. Asset compromised. Those 2 words were a death sentence. In our world, an asset wasn't a piece of equipment. It was a person, a human being. Specifically, it was my confidential informant, Leo, a mid-level accountant who had been on the inside of the financial fraud ring, feeding me information for 6 long, terrifying months. He was the key that had unlocked the entire case. His testimony was the linchpin for the federal indictments we were about to hand down. Compromise didn't just mean his cover was blown. It meant they knew. And the people we had taken down didn't leave loose ends. They buried them. "Carter, what is it?" Reynolds's voice cut through the fog, sharp and insistent. I held up the phone for him to see. He read the text, and I saw his professional mask slam back into place. The bank, the local cops, the civil rights investigation, all of it became secondary in a nanosecond. This was a threat to one of our own. "Who sent this?" he asked, his voice low and urgent. "It's a burn notice from the task force monitoring channel," I said, my mind already racing, processing threat vectors, escape routes, safe houses. The personal violation I'd felt all day was vaporized, replaced by the cold, hard calculus of a crisis in motion. "Leo. They found out about Leo." Without another word, Reynolds turned to his team. The shift in his demeanor was electric. It charged the air. "Marks! Lee, you're with me. Rest of you, finish up here. Lock this place down, get the statements, and hand it off to the local field office. This is now a secondary objective. Go." The agents moved without question, their previous mission instantly relegated. The banking dispute had been a brush fire. This was a forest fire. "Where is he?" Reynolds asked me as we strode quickly toward the exit, leaving a wake of confused silence behind us. "He's supposed to be in a protected debriefing at the federal courthouse downtown," I said, pulling out my phone and dialing a number from memory. He wasn't scheduled to be moved until tomorrow. The line picked up on the first ring. It was Agent Peterson, the case agent assigned to babysit Leo. "Peterson," I snapped. No time for pleasantries. "What's Leo's 20? Carter, What's going on? Peterson's voice was tinged with confusion. He's right here. We're in debrief room 4. Everything's fine. A cold spike of fear lanced through me. No, it's not. The network is compromised. I'm en route to your location. Lock the door. Do not open it for anyone. Acknowledge. But... Acknowledge, Peterson, I barked, my voice echoing slightly as we pushed through the bank doors into the afternoon sun. Acknowledged, he said, the alarm finally clear in his voice. Door is locked. I hung up. He's still at the courthouse, I told Reynolds as we piled into the lead SUV. He thinks he's secure. He's not, Reynolds said grimly, already speaking into his own phone. This is Reynolds. I need a tactical lockdown of the Frank J. McGarr Federal Courthouse, all entrances, all exits. I have a credible threat against a federal witness inside. Authorize level 1 response. Now. The driver pulled away from the curb before the doors were even fully shut, the powerful engine roaring to life. We didn't use sirens. Sirens announced your arrival. We moved through traffic with a controlled aggression that was far more intimidating. A silent black shark cutting through a school of fish. My mind was a whirlwind. How did they find out? A leak? A surveillance breach? Did they break one of the crew we'd arrested? The organization we had dismantled was sophisticated, with ties to international crime syndicates. They weren't just white-collar criminals, they were ruthless. They had lawyers who were as crooked as they were, and access to resources I didn't want to think about. Leo wasn't a hardened criminal. He was a scared accountant with a gambling problem and a conscience that had finally won out. He had a wife, 2 young kids. He had done the right thing, the brave thing, and I had promised him. I had promised him that we would protect him, that his family would be safe, a promise that was now turning to ash in my mouth. The head of the organization, Victor Orloff, I said, thinking aloud. He's in custody at the MCC, but his number 2, a man named Markov, is still in the wind. We missed him in the initial sweep. He's the muscle, the enforcer. If there's a breach, it's him, Reynolds agreed, his face set like granite. He'll be the one cleaning up. The courthouse loomed ahead, a modern fortress of glass and steel. As we approached, I could already see the first signs of the lockdown. Unmarked cars were converging, and plainclothes agents were securing the perimeter. Our driver bypassed the public entrance, heading for a secure underground garage. As we screeched to a halt in the garage, my phone rang again. It was Peterson. I answered it immediately. Talk to me. Carter, thank God, he said, his voice strained and breathless. Something's wrong. The fire alarm just went off. The whole floor is evacuating. No, I shouted, my heart seizing in my chest. Peterson, that's them. That's the play. They're flushing him out. Do not leave that room. It's too late. Aye, he yelled over the blare of the alarm. The marshals are ordering an evacuation. They're overriding the lock. They're opening the door. I could hear the metallic clank of the door being unlocked in the background, followed by shouting. Then, a sound that will be forever burned into my memory. 2 quick, muffled pops. Gunshots, fired through a silencer. Peterson, I screamed into the phone. Peterson, respond. There was a scuffle, a grunt of pain, and then silence. The line didn't go dead. It was just open. I could hear the piercing shriek of the fire alarm, and under it another sound. Footsteps. And a low, calm voice with a distinct Eastern European accent. Hello, Agent Carter, the voice said into the phone, cool and conversational. I believe you have something of ours, and now we have something of yours. The voice on the phone was a ghost from my nightmares. Markov. I'd studied his file, listened to his wiretapped calls, but hearing that voice, calm and deadly, directed at me through my informant's phone, was a physical shock. He had Peterson. He had Leo. He was inside a federal courthouse, a place that was supposed to be a sanctuary of law and order. Markov, I said, my voice dropping to a low, steady tone that betrayed none of the cold terror gripping my heart. Reynolds was watching me, his eyes hard, already motioning for the agents with us to move. So you remember me? Markov's voice was laced with a chilling amusement. I'm flattered. Your man, Leo, sends his regards. He is a bit tied up at the moment, as is your agent Peterson. They are my insurance. What do you want, Markov? I asked, pushing open the SUV door and stepping onto the concrete floor of the garage. We were moving. a tight formation of 4 agents, heading for the service elevator. "A trade," he said simply. "Orlov is a man of tradition. An eye for an eye. You took our leader, we take your witness. But I am feeling generous. I will give you a chance to get your people back. There is a ledger. Orlov's personal accounts. It was not in the evidence you seized. It contains everything. His offshore accounts, his political contacts, the names of every dirty cop and judge on his payroll. Your bonus check was a pittance. This ledger is the real prize." I knew the one he meant. It was the holy grail of the investigation, the one piece of evidence we could never locate. "You want to trade the ledger for Leo and Peterson," I stated, keeping him talking as we swiped a keycard and entered the elevator. Reynolds held up 4 fingers, indicating the floor where the debriefing room was. I nodded. "Not quite," Markov corrected me. "The ledger is in a safety deposit box at Sterling Trust Bank." My blood ran cold. "The key is in a locker at the downtown bus station, locker 3B. You, Agent Carter, will go get the key, alone. Then you will go to the bank, alone. You will retrieve the ledger. You have 1 hour. Any sign of your friends, any deviation from the plan, and your asset and your agent will be sent to their final audit." The line went dead. The elevator doors opened onto a scene of controlled chaos. The fire alarm was still blaring, and courthouse marshals were directing evacuating employees toward the stairwells. Reynolds was already barking orders into his radio, directing the tactical teams to sweep the building, but we all knew it was a diversion. Markov wanted me isolated. He wanted to use the very bank that had wronged me as the stage for his final act. "It's a trap, Carter," Reynolds said, his face grim. "He's not going to let them go." "I know," I said. "But he's also arrogant. He thinks he can control this. He's using the bank because he knows what happened to me there today. It's a psychological play. A message. What's your plan?" "I'm going to do exactly what he says," I replied, meeting his gaze. "But he only said I had to go alone. He didn't say what happens after I get there." A flicker of understanding passed between us. I left the courthouse, alone, as ordered. I took a cab to the bus station, my heart pounding with every tick of the clock. The locker was there. The key was inside. Every step felt like walking through molasses, the weight of 2 lives pressing down on me. When I walked back into Sterling Trust Bank for the 2nd time that day, the atmosphere was completely different. The crime scene tape was gone, but a palpable tension remained. A few stern-looking men, in suits bank executives, no doubt, were conferring in hushed tones. The branch was closed to the public. As I walked in, all eyes turned to me. I saw Kyle, sitting at a desk being interviewed by an FBI agent from the local field office. I saw Ms. Albright looking utterly broken, sitting in her glass-walled office, her own lawyer by her side. I ignored them all and walked to the vault. A nervous-looking executive met me there. "Agent Carter," he said, wringing his hands, "we were told to expect you. We will give you our full cooperation." I showed him the key. He led me into the vault, and a moment later I was holding a heavy, leather-bound book. Orlov's ledger. It felt evil in my hands, a testament to years of corruption and greed. My part was done. Now it was up to Reynolds. I walked out of the vault, ledger in hand. As I stepped back onto the main floor, I saw him. He was dressed as a janitor pushing a cleaning cart near the entrance, but it wasn't his uniform I recognized. It was his eyes, cold, predatory eyes that I had seen in dozens of surveillance photos. It was Markov. He had never been at the courthouse. He had been here, waiting. The fire alarm, the phone call, it was all a brilliant, brutal misdirection to get me to bring the prize directly to him. His plan was to take the ledger and walk out, leaving me to discover the bodies of my colleagues later. He gave me a slight, almost imperceptible nod, indicating I should walk toward him. My heart hammered against my ribs. I clutched the ledger to my chest and began to walk, each step a lifetime. I could feel the cold weight of the pistol holstered at the small of my back, a comfort and a terror all at once. As I got closer, I saw his hand slip inside his janitor's smock. This was it, the exchange. But I also saw something else. In the polished reflection of the marble floor, I saw movement behind me. 2 of the bank executives were converging silently, their paths precise, their focus absolute. Reynolds's team. They had been here the whole time, waiting for my signal. I met Markov's eyes. He smiled, a thin, cruel slash. "The book, Agent," he murmured, his voice low. "The hostages, Markov," I replied, my voice equally quiet. "Where are they?" "You are not in a position to—" That was my signal. I dropped. Not to the side, but straight down, tucking and rolling, clutching the ledger to my body. The moment my knees hit the floor, the bank erupted. "FBI, drop your weapon." The commands were a single, deafening roar from 2 directions. Markov was fast. A gun appeared in his hand, and he fired. Not at the agents, but at me. But I was already moving, the bullet ricocheting off the marble floor with a high-pitched scream, showering my back with stone fragments. Before he could fire a second time, the 2 agents opened fire. The sound of their weapons was deafening in the enclosed space. Markov was thrown backward, his body hitting the glass doors with a sickening thud before sliding to the floor. It was over in 3 seconds. Silence descended again, thick with the smell of cordite. Agents swarmed Markov's body, while another helped me to my feet. "Are you hit?" "No, I'm fine," I said, my voice shaking slightly. Reynolds was there a moment later, his hand on my shoulder. "We got them," he said, his voice tight with relief. "A tactical team hit the van they were holding Peterson and Leo in the moment you entered the bank. They're safe, banged up, but safe." The relief that washed over me was so total, so absolute, that my knees almost buckled. I leaned against a counter, taking a deep, shuddering breath. I looked around the bank. Ms. Albright was staring through her glass office wall, her face a mask of pure horror at the violence that had just unfolded in her pristine lobby. Kyle was huddled under his desk. Later, after the chaos had subsided and the forensics teams had taken over, I stood with Reynolds on the sidewalk outside. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. "You know," Reynolds said, looking back at the bank, "that check you deposited, it wasn't just a bonus, it was a test." I looked at him, confused. "A test, sir?" "The director has been looking for a new section chief for the Financial Crimes Division. Someone tough, meticulous, who can handle pressure. He authorized the bonus as a way to see who had the grit to close a case like Nightfall. But what happened today—" He shook his head, a rare, genuine smile on his face. "What you did today, Carter, the way you handled those cops, this bank, and then Markov, that wasn't just passing the test, that was writing a whole new one." I stood there, stunned, as the weight of his words sank in. I thought back to the morning, the simple act of walking into a bank, the humiliation, the anger, the fight. It hadn't been a detour from my life. It had been the final, crucial piece of it. It had revealed a strength I didn't even know I had. I hadn't just been fighting for my rights or my dignity. I had been fighting for my future. And for the first time all day, standing on that city street, I felt the lightness return, not as a fleeting moment, but as a permanent, hard-won peace.